Hello, friends, one and all. My name is Nathan Hood, and you are watching the Merry Corncrakes, which is the affiliated podcast or show to the Corncrake magazine. The Corncrake magazine publishes stories, classical and contemporary, from English literature, celebrating good storytelling. And today, my guest is someone who the Corncrake and the editors of the Corncrake, the readers of the Corncrake, have a lot to thank for because from the very beginning, he has been a supporter, writing many stories, and indeed, he's probably the author with the most stories in the Corncrake, and supported it from a very early point, and used to run the podcast associated with the Corncrake. So it is my honor to welcome Liquid Swan. Hello, Liquid. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And today we're going to focus on your most recent story, which is coming out, or has come out with the Corncrake this month, The Dentist. And it's interesting because you did an audio recording of this, which went live in the previous episode. And some people were writing in the comments they didn't expect the Corncrake to have a story like this. And I wondered what your initial reaction was to that. Is that something you expected from readers, that they would be surprised by this kind of tale?
I think so. I wasn't surprised to hear that reaction because it is a little bit different than what you typically find in Corncrake. Um, so yeah, I wasn't surprised. It was nice to see the reaction I expected.
That's good. You achieved your goal with the story, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I don't want to kind of give away too much because I think people need to read it and have a little bit of that shock or surprise themselves. But I think it would be fair to say that it's almost like a fever dream, or dealing with the insane and absurd and violent, and isn't kind of like, it's not a nice story, and it's not something which is um, like a typical hero's journey or something like that. It's much more
Hmm.
dealing with kind of a very twisted reality. And so I wanted to ask, what drew you to writing about the dentist, this character who's going through all of these things, who's going through this kind of mad psychotic episode?
Well, with the way it's kind of funny because I often write at work, and so what happens is with my job, it's not firefighting, but it's sort of the same schedule. Stuff comes in, it's done. But I'm always around to do it. So I'm standing by, standing down, standing by, as Trump says. And so I was. What will happen often is I'll be writing, but then like my coffee will run out, and
Mm.
I'll just get kind of tired, and there's nothing going on. Like I kind of just relax, and I started going. I think I'm starting to enter a biphasic sleep pattern, which I don't know if it's good, but basically I seem to sleep at night for like maybe less than 6 hours, then I sleep during the day for an hour or two.
Mm.
And so this was one of those moments where I was kind of half asleep, and this sort of idea came into my mind while I was like leaning back and in and out of consciousness or in and out of sleep.
Mm.
And so I started thinking of I think I had a dentist appointment coming up, and I just started thinking of Chicagoland because I've been there a couple times. I'm not from Chicago. I'm from Canada on the West Coast, uh, but Chicago was very intriguing to me because it's a very nice place. Like you wouldn't what you hear about it is kind of like it's all gangland or whatever. No, that's
Mm.
true, but there's also very nice spots about it. Like you could be in Europe almost, except for the demographics. The way Chicago looks, like very Germanic and very well, let's say Germanic and English. And what I found was there's these people there that live in these weird existences that just are sort of outside the society, but they're sort of orbiting around civilization. And there's like these
Mhm.
often there are particular demographics. So the dentist is not clear, though he's probably of European descent, and he's degenerated, let's say, um, into a sort of drug-induced psychosis or perhaps schizophrenia. And the have you ever heard the movie Hardcore Henry?
No, I haven't.
So most stories are written from like a second person or third person point of view, sometimes first, but pretty rarely. Usually it mixes them. So I wanted to do a story that was almost completely first person. Basically just a guy narrating sort of like Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground.
Mm.
But I wanted it to be sort of action packed and just sort of crazy. So I had to so as I was writing it, I kind of was these sort of fever dream ideas came into my mind, like the seagulls. I think the seagulls might have been from sort of a latent memory of like James and the Giant Peach, and all this, there is some references in there that come from my life experience, like the magazine cover with the if you remember the magazine cover flapping in the breeze. That was
Oh yeah.
from
Hmm.
that's from like a 1950s movie. Um, what's it? The guy where you're gonna shoot your eye out. He's got the Red Ryder BB gun or whatever. That sort of came from that. But the idea behind it was basically just I was sort of in a not a fever dream, but in and out of consciousness, and then I woke up and I just started writing it down. I was like, okay, but then I had to sort of organize it because if it's just crazy, it doesn't make any sense. So I
Mm.
had to sort of order it, right? But that was the basis of my deciding to write this. And I was thinking also like I got to do something a little bit new. I don't want to do the same old thing over and over again all the time because it'll get tired, you know.
I mean it. I mean, there's a few things I want to pick up there. One is just it's interesting that you mentioned being between sleep and dreamland in a way, because when this story came to you, because
Hmm.
um, Schopenhauer in the 19th century and influenced a lot of artists when he argued that actually it's in sleep, it's through dreams that a lot of artistic inspiration arises. It's kind of you're freed from the rational mind or the everyday mind, which closes down those artistic possibilities. It's almost like a force is able to rush in that liminal gap between
Hmm.
between. So that it sounds like that's a good case of that in terms of um, and very fitting for this story.
And it's the same for my previous story, The Tower. That sort
Mm,
of that was. And I have another one coming up. I think it's gonna be way too long to put in the Corncrake, but it's sort of like AI crossed with myth mythology.
mm.
So I'm trying to blend those two ideas together, but it's way too long. It's like 13,000 words already. I'm aiming for 40, so it might just be a book at some point.
That sounds brilliant. That sounds brilliant. I look forward to that. I guess
I'll send you the draft later.
awesome, awesome. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's so why do you think these characters seem these are characters who are like in the tower as well, a lot of absurdity, a lot of twisted horror aspects, but also kind of confusion about what is real and what is not. Why is that coming through at that time for you? Like what do you think it is about being between the waking and the sleeping world, which draws these characters out of you?
I think I've done a lot of like a lot of my hobbies is to do genealogy, so I've traced my family like back quite a ways. And
Hmm.
what I've learned, I don't know if it's the same as someone that lives in Europe or lives in their homeland, but for me, I feel like there's always a disconnection, sort of like there's a air gap between me and my ancestors because my later ancestors obviously came to North America at various times and points. Some at Jamestown, some at not till the 19th century or 20th century. And so I kind of feel like there's like this missing link that maybe I'm like psychologically trying to like connect back to that sort of uh, that link that lost the link, you know. Um, and I've done it's been interesting because I've done a lot of work and I've been trying to find like a link that would get me like citizenship back in Europe. And I actually finally did get that. But a lot of my I'm in the process. I'm in the process of getting Luxembourgish citizenship, if you could imagine. Um, but basically, I've been trying to like reconnect to these things. I think this is what sort of is pushing me in that direction. Is that sort of desire to find where I came from.
And uh, I mean that's interesting. Like because the dentist, like how do you see yourself coming from the dentist or connected to your lineage in that way?
I think that was just more a desire just to like do something a little bit different.
Oh, I see.
Uh, in terms of like the dentist itself is more about my own experience in the chaos of America, I guess maybe in some sense. The chaos and the beauty, you know, there's a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of beauty in the dentist, but there's um, it sort of describes a little bit of my experience in Chicago, let's say.
Well, I guess it's one thing that struck me, and it's interesting that you highlight the Americanness too, is that he's a kind of wandering figure. He goes
Hmm.
through life into different scenarios, and there's a lot of American characters like that. I think of, today a big one is Jack Reacher, for example. He goes into a town and has an escapade and then moves on to the next town. The Wild West stuff also has that, the man with no name and so on. And
Hmm.
think of like The Road, very famous book, the highways of America and so on. It seems like this sort of nomadic life is something that is inbuilt in American culture, but to still have that in today's world, you're going to have to be an outsider or slightly out there, and and so somebody like the dentist is probably one of the few people who can still have that nomadic existence.
And it's also never clear in the story whether he actually is a dentist.
That's
It's
true.
just sort of it's sort of like maybe that's part of his like craziness, you know, is the schizophrenia. Um, but he imagines himself as as some type of dentist. Anyhow, if you read the
Hmm.
story, I've read this. That'll be pretty clear.
He very much does, and he gets into a lot of situations, which is quite entertaining reading his thought patterns. I think you do a great job of entering into his perspective and making it a convincing perspective. And so I was wondering, how do you go about doing that? Because okay, you've had this idea, but how as a writer do you translate that into the words you're writing on the page?
Um, I think it might come from just experience with really crazy people. Not that I hang out with them all the time, but like I see, uh, because I live in let's call it I live in Victoria, British Columbia. So the thing is, with Victoria is there's a lot of crazy people from all over Canada come here because it's warmer, like compared to the rest of Canada. We hardly get any snow. We get like maybe a couple inches every year, and that's it. So a lot of homeless people come here, and they end up getting in the system, and you just see them everywhere. Like it's not if you go downtown, people avoid downtown because it's a nut house. It's literally an open air nut house out there. And so you kind of hear these stories of people, and then you hear their sort of like excuses of why they did crimes, and they don't really make a lot of sense, but they're very, very, very convinced that this is the way it is. And so what I wanted to do was when I was writing these situations and events that he was going through in the dentist, I wanted to make it seem like he was very, very sure of himself, or if he was questioning that the questions were like to him rational, even though to the reader like they're they're nuts. Like like the seagulls and the hawks, you know, like that sort of thing, you know. Like for him, it was he was very very sure that this was happening when there was zero evidence of it. And, so I was just thinking, okay, well, just start with the craziness and then just keep running with it. Just keep going. Like don't stop. Like just go a full sprint. And if you hit a wall, then you hit a wall. And he runs into walls constantly.
He does. Most of the time, he manages to bust through them. It must be said. But it's I find it interesting because in part because okay, so we the reader, as you say, we know what he's saying is nuts, but it's what you said about the kind of insanity of modern American life.
Hmm.
That's also part of it. Like he can only exist because of this world that we're currently in, and in a way, you could see a lot of the things that so-called normal people are committed to today as being equally insane, and the questions are
Hmm.
rational to them. But actually, if you were looking into it from 100 years time or something, you would have the same reaction almost as we do to the dentist.
And I've come across this many times.
Mm.
Over like during the COVID period, when you know everyone was freaking out about the vaccines, and you got to get sorry, everyone's freaking out about you had to get vaccinated, and because it was kind of like a process during COVID where you start out with when it first started happening, I was watching it happen on 4chan. And I was like seeing all these videos of Chinese people falling down and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, Jesus, that looks bad. Like it looks like it's really bad. I was really, really worried. I got strep throat, I think, just before it dropped in the public eye, and luckily I got that solved before because Canada healthcare, right? Britain, I don't know if it's like this, but Canada, if you get strep throat, it's like you gotta see a doctor. You can't get to see one. You just suffer with the strep throat until you can get the antibiotics. And you know you have it, but you have to see a doctor first because of the way the bureaucracy works. Anyways, so I I was early on worried about COVID, thinking it was serious, but then by the time they started doing like the mandates, long before that actually. I was like, oh, this is actually not that bad. Like 1% of people get seriously ill, and like barely only people that are dying are like they're really really old and ill. And so I was thinking, well, why would you shut down society for this? And so I was really against all the pushing and the force against people's will to do it. And so many people fell to this. It made me feel like if people can fall for that sort of craziness, maybe that's just the mentally ill people maybe have something to say, you know.
Well, no, I think often as well, what we define as crazy is often a tool of power as well, isn't it? So, like, I remember watching this thing. I think it was Louis Theroux. Do you know Louis Theroux? He's a
Yeah, it's familiar, yeah.
Yeah, he does documentaries, and they have a certain style where he tries to appear like this open-minded, neutral interviewer. That actually, the way he frames things is very skewed. And
Mm,
he went to a mental asylum in America somewhere, where there's people there who believe that they're in touch with God and have divine messages to share, and so on. And the doctors are all saying that these people have such and such condition or whatever, but they're perfectly, in their minds, they believe that what they're apprehending is reality.
hmm
But part of me was thinking, well, okay, that person there that you've just shown, okay, I've not seen their whole lives and so on, but they don't seem like they're um like crazy. They're just saying, like, I think I've got something from God, and because materialism is the de facto, therefore they must be ill. It's
hmm
so it's the therapeutic mindset allows you to say something which is against the current vogue, against the current culture, whether it's religion or a certain political positions, or you must be mentally ill to hold those positions. They're a symptom of illness.
Yeah, and you see that rhetoric often with like in politics as well. I don't notice you don't notice a little bit from the right saying like calling crazy lefties, but I mean
Hmm.
I think in that case it's subjective, but I mean probably not probably pretty biased in that. Um, but but yeah, but the right wing or the lefties will call right wing people like they have brain worms and stuff like that, and
Right.
but it's a very shallow analysis I think, and what I've noticed with mentally ill people is usually they aren't completely crazy. Like they have a lot of people have problems and whatnot, but they've sort of been led down these pathways that cause these contradictions in their mind, and then it comes out as mental illness all the time. I mean, some people are just like totally mentally crazy because there's something definitely wrong with them. We don't know, but
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of people in there that get caught up in it, and they're probably mostly normal.
Well, that's the thing as well, isn't it? It's not as I think the dentist seems a very extreme case uh, in general. But then I was asking during the story, okay, where's his family or where's his support? He just seems a total individual. He's a lone survivor, a lone wolf walking the streets. He doesn't seem to have anyone in his life.
Yeah, well, there are people like that, and I've come across people like
Mm.
this, and it's kind of you kind of look at them and you're like, well, that's kind of scary. Um, and you can see like if you're in that situation, you're either at the end of your line or there's not much to again, there's nothing to save you from yourself.
Mm.
you know. And that sometimes I think the thing that hurts most people is themselves, and whether that's like a result of maybe their parenting or whatever, or raising, whatever. Either way, they need to be saved back from themselves mostly, not from the outside forces. We mostly hurt ourselves, like in the way we eat, the way we um,
Mm.
maybe don't exercise. I think Benjamin Franklin said like in his what was it Benjamin? I think it was Benjamin Franklin. He was talking about how people were complaining about taxation because they were paying like
Mm.
one tenth or whatever for taxes, or one fifth for taxes, and he's like, but how much do you pay in laziness? You probably pay 20 times what you pay in taxes in laziness, you know? I'm like, oh, that's
Mm.
so true, you know?
That's very true, and it's especially in a time where the default is to blame an external reality or its external group or person for your own problems. That's
Hmm.
quite a that's a challenging message, and I think in some ways with the dentist you can kind of see that he's getting into all of these situations because of his own way of seeing the world,
Yeah,
and it's nobody else's fault that he's doing that right. Um, as far as I can see in this story,
yeah.
he's very much the agent that's doing all of this. Um, but I wanted to ask you in terms of this story and the tower as well, which was in an earlier installment of the Corncrake. These are kind of themes or types of story that you obviously intrigues you and you keep coming back to. And as we said at the beginning, is a bit different from most of the stories in there are like fantasy or a traditional hero story or something like that. So some people might think, well, is this a good story? Is this actually a good thing to be reading?
Hmm.
Why should this be in the Corncrake, for example? Why why
Hmm.
why do you think that it has a place in good storytelling?
Um, I think that again, I think it's more about like digging into like the mind, a specific mindset. Because when you're looking at a story, you're looking at a variety of, like in the Tower, for example, the main character, sort of like the narrator guy, goes up, and you can imagine him as yourself, you can imagine him as Odin, you can imagine him as um, Indra. Whatever you want. You can project yourself, or project something onto the story. But most stories sort of lay that out for you, and um, like you can project yourself into Romeo and Juliet, right? But it becomes it's also going to take a lot longer. So I guess the point is more to like concentrate the story and have it more focused on a particular character that you can project onto. Not that everyone will, which is sort of also, yeah, a little bit inspired. Like the whole Tower story is obviously inspired by Norse mythology a little bit, and a little and medievalism. But sorry, go ahead.
No, no, yeah, yeah, I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, yeah. So that whole the style is sort of like if you read like the sagas from Iceland or whatever, they're sort of
Mm,
like it's sort of reminiscent of that. But it's for like a modern English speaking audience, because sometimes reading a translation of the saga, you don't get all the jokes, you don't get all the well, there's no jokes in the Tower, but well, maybe there's one or two. But, they're pretty dark. But still, like you'll miss out on a lot of it. So I was trying to think of
mm,
like how can I make this good for us, for like our people, let's say, the modern or postmodern audience. And I think that's it's very difficult to translate that sort of idea into this era, because we don't suffer like they did. You
mhm,
know, we don't feel pain like, well, not this. We don't feel pain like they did. As we would if we did, but we don't. So like a lot, I think the whole idea of like leftism, for example, and not to get political, but this whole idea of like ending suffering is like we've ended a lot of it. You know, if we end all of it, we're gonna shoot ourselves up with heroin and just fall asleep, and that's sort of like the death in some sense, right? In my mind, like traditionalism fights for life, and
mhm,
um, what do you what's the other one? The opposite of traditionalism, progressivism fights for death. it fights for the right to die, like to sleep. And you see it in the politics too, how they promote certain things. And that's sort of what I think every time someone writes a story with traditional themes, it's like a fight for, it's like gasping for air, like swimming up from the deep and taking
Mm.
breaths of air and then getting sucked back down and fighting the kraken or whatever the whale, and then coming back up and getting another breath. And it's like an endless. I kind of envision like civilization like this. Imagine you're on a small boat with your infant son, and that's all civilization. You floating on this like torrent, this this horrible ocean that's just blasting you with sea salt spray and wind, and you're cold and you barely keep alive. Maybe you're fishing a little bit and getting a little bit of fish, but then the boat flips over and you're in the water with your son, and you're gone. You're just done, like yourself. So with your last gasp of energy and love, you toss your son up on the boat and then sink to the deep.
I feel like this should be another story that you write for the Corncrake, to be honest. It's a it's a very compelling one. I think as well that the there's a place then for the crazy and insane perspective, insofar as it, to me, it for most people it's a wholly unique experience, like reading that. I remember reading one of Chesterton's stories, The Man Who's Called Thursday,
Mm,
and towards the end of that story, it was all very becoming very strange and weird, and the whole tone shifted. And I just remember having this really being left kind of stunned and almost like I couldn't anchor myself in anything anymore. I didn't know what was what. I came away
mm,
reading the book and I had to take like an hour just like sitting there just to finally recollect myself. Like all
mm,
my mind had kind of just lost its framework for a moment there. And I think like something like the tower, something like the dentist does that. It kind of breaks open our normal perspective with all of its assumptions about how things should be, the modern world, and so on. It kind of brings us into something alien, but in so doing, um, helps us to remove some of those preconceptions and move beyond into something more real.
mm,
So I can see that these stories actually have a kind of purifying effect, or um, can help in that journey towards a more full life, actually.
mm. Well, one thing that I was trying to do with the story was when I was writing, I was like, in my head, I'm like, no one will think this could happen. Like
Mm,
no one would think like, or maybe you'd think it would happen at the beginning when he's in the house. But then stuff goes on, and you're like, okay, it gets like less and less likely to happen as the story goes on. Like, well, but then it also becomes more and more likely because you start to understand how the person thinks. Um,
mm,
so so like the whole thing with the seagulls and the TVs, obviously that's obviously not very realistic, but in his mind it's so real. Um, and do you remember did you read Crime and Punishment?
I've read parts of it.
Okay. Do you remember the like the main story, the Raskolnikov? That's the main guy.
Mhm,
The story mostly centered around, but there's a side story with Svidrigailov, which is sort of a guy that's been on the road, the same road that Raskolnikov's on, but he's like further along.
mm,
Anyways, there's his last scene where he in the book where he crosses the bridge. I think it's I think it's the Egyptian bridge, I believe. I can't quite remember. I've been to St. Petersburg, so it was actually pretty. I like that book because I could envision everything that was going on.
mhm,
But it was dirtier in the book because I think it's older and dirt roads. Anyway, so he's on this bridge and he says, I don't want to give it away because it's mind blowing, but he says he's going to go to America and to the police officer, and that blew my mind. I had to put the book down for like 20 minutes. Like I couldn't read it after that. I'd like put it down and finish it later. Um, and it's funny because the way they translate the translation I had, and it's notorious for this, is like it's very hard to read. Like it's like very kind of slow until he gets to the points where it's like blasting your brain apart because it's just so crazy. Um, and I was I actually had to read it like a monk. Like I would basically walk around my work like a monk, like basically walking. I had to keep walking, otherwise I would fall asleep during certain parts of that book. But then when I hit those parts where he goes to America, for example, which is pretty, the whole thing leading up to that's pretty crazy. Kind of probably has some inspiration in the dentist. Uh, it really makes it bigger when it happens. And actually, a lot. Now that I think about it, a lot of the sort of mental illness aspects of this story come from my experience reading Crime and Punishment with Raskolnikov's craziness at the beginning of the story, and yeah, that's definitely the case.
I like it. It's the spiritual sequel to Crime and Punishment. You've heard it here first, folks. So, we're coming towards the end of the episode, and I just wanted to ask: is there anything on the horizon? Anything you would like to promote to the viewers at home?
Well, I've been on a little bit of a hiatus for the last couple of months. I had a trip to Brazil that took a whole month.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, my father passed away in October, all of a sudden, out of nowhere. He was only 66, so that
Hmm.
I've been dealing with stuff to do with that. But I hope to get back into the swing of things once I get all that stuff solved. I don't have anything on the immediate horizon other than the book I'm writing.
You had a
Uh,
book published not too long ago.
oh yeah, I do have a book, it's a series of essays. You can find them on my Substack too, which is just
Hmm.
liquidswan.substack.com. But it's called Essays on the Western Decline, and you can find it on Amazon uh, in two different formats. One the hardback is actually a picture I took in Iceland of Kristafirkirkja, which is Kirka, which is a really old church in a small rural area of Iceland in the south coast, and it looks really nice.
Hmm.
And then the other one's obviously more of a sort of a postmodern-y cover, but yeah, it's basically just essays I put together and then edited into like a certain order, so it sort of made logical sense. Um, But again, it's just if you want to buy stuff like that and have it on your shelf, it looks nice on the shelf. I'll tell you that for sure. Um, but if you don't want, if you don't have any money, you can read them for free. And also, if anybody ever wants to contact me, like my Twitter DMs are open as well. I always like to people often give me ideas, and then I sometimes work them into things.
Well, I would thoroughly recommend it. I ordered it a few months ago, and
Oh,
I've enjoyed
nice.
it thus far. And yeah, I would also recommend everybody go and read this month's Corncrake. Read The Dentist. Leave your thoughts below. Ask Liquid about how he could come up with such a crazy character. And yes, just remember to go to corncrakemac.com to find out more from the Corncrake. Thank you, Liquid. I've much enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you so much. You take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.